Welcome to module number 1 on understanding the ego. This first module is all about laying the foundation for understanding third density consciousness. And in this first lecture, we're going to be talking about the origins of the ego, because the ego is synonymous with third density consciousness. And understanding the ego is the best way of transcending it. So as with this lecture and every lecture in this masterclass, please feel free to pause the video anytime you need to write down notes of anything that stands out to you as helpful or any sort of aha moments or downloads that you get. Because writing things down is a really helpful way of remembering them and integrating them. So in this lecture, you're going to be learning the sort of framework for understanding the underlying cause for every movement that the ego makes, as well as how to identify the ego when it's at work in your own mind. So you'll want to watch this lecture video and every video in this course at least twice. Again, just to help you condense and digest everything that you're learning here. Spiritual intelligence is cultivated especially when we understand things not just from the physical dimension, but from the metaphysical dimension. Because the physical dimension is the realm of effects, but the metaphysical dimension is the realm of causes. And so that's where we find real answers that we're looking for. And so we're going to look at the metaphysical causes and functions of the ego in this lecture to give you a greater capacity to begin recognizing the ego when it's at work in your own mind. If you don't understand the ego, then it is unavoidable that you're going to make an enemy out of it. And as we know, what you fight, you strengthen. Nobody likes to suffer. And so when we are identified with the voice in our head that makes us suffer, we begin to resist it. And when you resist the ego, you are actually giving it power. You're saying, yes, you truly do exist and you have authority over me. So once you understand it, you just stop feeling the need to resist it, because it stops feeling like you. It stops feeling like a threat, and you understand it to be just an innocent evolutionary mechanism in the mind. So when it comes to understanding the ego, we have to begin with the all-important question of why does the ego exist? I get this question asked all the time. If the ego causes all my suffering, then why does it exist at all? Did the source make some huge mistake or something? I don't get it. So I want to cover this question from two different viewpoints. First, from the cosmic level, and secondly, from the human level. So from the cosmic level, the ego is a product of the veiling process of third density, or the veil of forgetting, as it's described in the Law of One. The third density is all about the soul's choosing of polarity. And because the soul has to choose either the positive or the negative polarity, in order to graduate from this density, it means that there must be an equal proportion, a 50-50 split of each polarity, in addition to absolutely no memory of who we are as eternal beings, or where we come from, or why we're here at all. And so because we have this veil of forgetting in third density, this question is born within the mind, who am I? And the ego is basically created because without our cosmic remembrance, evolution answers this question for us. And it says, you are an organism living in an environment where you must get all of your needs met, protect yourself from harm, and always try to improve yourself. So this is just the basic primal energy within us of survival and sexuality. That is the foundation upon which the ego is built, which is why the underlying cause of everything ego does is to survive. And this energy is born from the root chakra, which is where the first belief of ego comes from. But we're going to dive into that in Module 5. So that's sort of an overview of how the ego comes to be from a cosmic level. But from a human level, we can say that the ego is a product of evolution or natural selection. And that should be obvious, right? Because literally everything on this planet is a product of evolution. Everything is always in a state of evolution or forward progression or adaptation. So the question is, how and why did this mechanism evolve in the mind? And this brings us to the first huge key for understanding where the ego began. The ego essentially began at the advent of human language. Or we could say that the ego is a product of the invention of language. At a certain point in our evolutionary past, and nobody really knows when this was, the ancient hominids, through which we evolved from, would have began using sort of guttural noises to refer to things and different objects like rock, tree, banana, water, and so forth. And this would have been a very helpful adaptation for survival. But an interesting thing happened at some point, and again, nobody knows when this happened, but these ancient hominids who started using guttural noises to communicate concepts to one another in a very primitive way would have, at a very early stage, began using these noises to refer to one another, giving each other names. And so at the point where each entity is given a name of whatever that might have sounded like, millions of years ago perhaps, when I'm given a name, that allows the mind to do an amazing thing. For the first time ever, it actually flipped in on itself and became an object unto itself. And this is when the knowledge I am was born in the conceptual mind. The knowledge I am has always been within us, even in the second density stage of animals and insects and plants. Everything has the intuitive knowledge of I am, I exist, which is why all organisms fight to survive in the wild. Animals have an intuitive knowing that they're separate or different from the environment and other beings in the environment. But they don't have the ability to psychologically suffer because they don't have a psychological concept of I exist. So the second density ego of the animal pales in comparison to the magnitude of the third density ego of the human. And we're going to talk more about that here in a minute. So once I know that I am a separate body, an individual self, separate from all the other selves in my environment, that means I can now begin sort of contemplating past and future. If I need to get things to survive and to reproduce, now I have thought available and I can think about the things I need to get or want to get in the future, where desire is born. And once I know I am, I can remember all of my past experiences and learn from them, or perhaps feel guilty about them. And this is where fear is born, by sort of mapping the present moment based on what I've experienced in the past. So desire and fear is also a byproduct of the belief in separation and self-awareness. And this is very much what makes us unique from animals, right? If you've ever watched the sort of terrifying, harrowing videos on Discovery Channel of an antelope sprinting full speed to escape from a lion trying to hunt it down, we watch it weave and zigzag through the Sahara and somehow narrowly escapes being eaten alive by a ferocious predator. What happens to the antelope 10 minutes later? It's already back with its herd and just grazing peacefully. It doesn't need to go see an animal psychologist or therapist like we would. So this shows us the massive difference between third density consciousness and second density consciousness, or awareness versus self-awareness. Self-awareness is unique in that it gives the mind the ability to psychologically suffer. So we know that as human language continued to evolve and become more complex, human society evolved right alongside with it. Things like jobs and tribes or groups, technology and things of that nature began to evolve because language was evolving. Labels were evolving. And this brings us to the second important point about the ego. As the ego was created by language, it was shaped and molded by the social hierarchy. The social hierarchy becomes the ego's most important factor in third density, whereas in second density, physical survival was the most important factor. But once we develop technology and tribes and all the things humans are known for, we don't have to worry so much about physical survival anymore. Unless you go wandering in the forest at night or something, you're probably going to be okay. But in third density, social survival becomes everything. Because as we know, there is a social hierarchy in every form of human society that's ever existed since time immemorial. And the higher up you go in that social ladder, the better and better your quality of life gets. The higher up the ladder I move, I get access to better mates, better food, better shelter. I have to do less of the grunt work and hard labor. And life gets better and better for me the higher up I go. But the lower I go on the social totem pole, the worse things get for me. And if I go down the social ladder far enough, let's say I get an infectious disease, or I get caught stealing or doing something seen as wrong by the tribe, I could be exiled from the tribe. And if I really mess up, I might even be executed by my tribe. So the ego had to begin adapting to this new stimulus of navigating the social landscape. And so this is why the ego believes that everything depends on how others see me. The way that other people see me is now my survival. And this is still true even today, isn't it? We still want status, acclaim from others, wealth and power. And we can trace this all the way back to our tribal past and the need to ascend up the social ladder. So if you understand this one concept about the ego, how it is a product of the social hierarchy, then you will begin to understand everything the ego does and the way that it processes information. So maybe now you can begin to see what we mean when we say the ego doesn't exist. Always sounds like a confusing statement to people, but maybe now you're starting to formulate an idea that the ego is clearly not an entity, but an activity. And if you're going to write anything down on your notes from this lecture, make sure to write this down. The ego is the mental activity of identifying. Because the ego needs outside approval so much for its survival, identity is its answer for the need for outside approval. After all, if I'm going to ascend up this social ladder or be exalted up the ladder by others, then I have to provide some kind of value to the group. How do I know what value I'm providing? Based on my identities. And this is based on what I do or what I have. Other people will favor me and like me and exalt me if I can do things or if I have things that will benefit them. If I'm smart or attractive or helpful or powerful in some way. So you can see how the source within us, the I am principle itself, is based on being and giving. We call that love. The ego is divorced from the knowledge of source, which means its identities are based on doing and having. Being and giving versus doing and having. They're mutually opposed to one another. So an identity is sort of the ego's way of feeling like it knows where it fits into the social group and how other people are going to see it.